All right, so we're gonna talk about Stinky Trisha. Um, I actually, my understanding is the podcast was supposed to come out like the midnight of Wednesday, right? That's when podcasts come out, Wednesdays at midnight. I couldn't find it. At least I couldn't find it on YouTube. Then I realized it was a Spotify podcast. So I was like, oh, I should probably look on Spotify, and there it was. Then the next question was like, oh, can I watch this on like stream? Am I allowed to watch this on stream? And I looked into it, and apparently you can't. You can't watch the Spotify podcasts on stream. So I listened to it offline, and I put down a bunch of talking points from it. Now, I would urge you to listen to what I have to say, and then maybe go watch it yourself or listen to it yourself. It's probably a decent idea. It's about, I think, 48 minutes or 38 minutes long. It was quite a shit show, though. Well, the first thing I will say, though, is that, like, I think, and this is just a theory, this is really just a theory, I believe that what happened is Ethan played like a third or a half of the podcast, and then Keemstar probably tried to strike him down. Right? And that's probably why Ethan got that 1 week ban. I honestly believe that's the truth. But yeah. Anyway. We are going to go through some of the talking points that I've seen. And there's only a few, and this will make the video shorter anyway. Anyway, I wrote some notes that I'm looking at on my screen. The first note I wrote was that it's a fucking cringe intro, bro. I cringed so hard listening to like the intro and like outro of Keemstar's podcast. It made me want to take my own life. The next thing I noticed is that Keemstar apparently reached out to Trisha. Now, a lot of people were saying that, like, oh, Keemstar is like, oh, he's playing both sides. He's such an intelligent guy. Keemstar is shameless. Trisha is somebody who's tried to deplatform Keemstar along with Ethan, and Keemstar just reached out to hit her because he knew it would be commentary and drama, and he has no pride or shame. And, like, as a normal person, you would be like, I'm not going to interact with that person. I think that they're morally deplorable and tried to deplatform me. But, like, which is fine. You know, you do. You know, my point is he's not intelligent, so let's stop acting like he is. Trisha seemed very open to being in a friendship with Keemstar, which is bizarre considering her literal take was that like he was predatorizing a 20-year-old girl because she was dating her at 39. That's insane. You're gonna be a friend with somebody that you called like some kind of a predator. That how more like you're obviously wrong because 20 and 39, while it is weird, it's legal, it's moral. Yes, there's an existence of a power dynamic because he's in charge or he's famous, but the existence of power dynamics do not create instant abuse of power dynamics. So you really can't just decide that it's instantly abuse. But anyway, if you interpreted it as that, then like it actually would be part of sexual assault culture to associate yourself with somebody that you think is somebody who is like a predator in some capacity. Oh my goodness. Trisha constantly brought up the whole like thing from like 3 years ago where Ethan had her on his podcast, and like, well, Ethan made a video. Some say one of his last funny videos where he talked about like personalities on Instagram and whatnot. Heavily photoshopping their images and whatnot, heavily photoshopping like their different images and et cetera, to make them look better. And like he made comments that she was like a whale and stuff and unattractive and whatever, which was rude. But like I understand the fundamental point was like, hey, people are like intentionally presenting themselves in a dishonest way, and it's harmful for the mentalities of young people. But she constantly brought it up, and the reason that it's relevant is because she kept saying that she thinks people should be able to apologize for their mistakes and move forward. But he apologized for that multiple times. And she won't let him move forward. She constantly brings it up, and she kept saying all the time, like, I don't like Ethan because he just brings up people's pasts. But like all she does is bring up his past of things that he acknowledges and apologizes for. One thing I thought was funny is that Keemstar said that they had similar backgrounds to Trisha. I think that's true. They're both like really bad people, really unintelligent, shitty people. One thing that I picked up on that I thought was very telling is despite the fact that Trisha was constantly saying she's more Team Ethan while slandering him the whole time, she also mentioned this quote of like my enemy is my friend in reference to being friends with Keemstar, which means that she believes that Ethan is her enemy, and that's the reason why she's actually associating with Keemstar. It's true. There was talking about how the both of them would like to talk. Like Ethan and Keemstar should sit down and have a conversation. You know, people say that the reason that he doesn't want to do that is because, well, people keep saying it's because he's like a coward, this and that. And I did see the whole Sam Cedar thing, whatever. I really just think more than anything else, honestly, and like I'm not a huge Ethan fan, but I think that Ethan just sees Keemstar as a really bad person that's not worth having a conversation with. And I can like generally respect that. Like there are some people that if you think somebody is so morally reprehensible, then you shouldn't be making content with them. Like, you know, do I think Keemstar's as bad as Ethan does think? Probably not. He's still a really bad person. I think he's a really dumb person. But like I understand that. That's not really cowardice to me. To me, that really just shows that he's like, I have a particular set of values, and I think that talking with Keemstar would invade those values. Another thing Trisha loves to do, this is every podcast she goes on. Every single podcast she goes on, I'll look at that in a bit, sorry, man. She always slanders Ethan and always makes it seem like he's the bad guy and he's why the frenemies was over. And she did it again. She went on there and she said, the other times that I walked off the show and ended things, which she didn't really end them, but like, you know, pretended to. She's like, those were my fault, but the last one was Ethan's fault. That was insane. It was. I'm sitting here and I'm like, this is insane. Like, she's out of her mind. She likes to say that she apologizes for things and takes accountability, but then she says shit like that. And like, very clearly, she wasn't apologetic at all for like what she did to try, like, honestly try to ruin Ethan's life. But again, I'm not an Ethan fan, but that's what she did. She really went out of her way. And this goes to the pattern of Trisha constantly doing this. What she does, this thing is what she does. She tries to rewrite history. She just lies about an event constantly for a long period of time. So she'll lie about it when it comes out, nobody believes her. She lies about it again weeks or for weeks. It's been months now. So she'll just keep lying every day, every week, every month, and all of a sudden people go, oh, maybe that is what it was, because, you know, normal people don't talk about fucking that particular instance constantly. In general, people will talk about something and then they'll move on from it. She keeps going, and it's like insanity. And eventually people start going like, maybe she was right. Maybe it's not what happened. It's just not what happened. One thing that I thought was weird was like Moses is just always there quietly in the background, not talking. I find it like bizarre. I don't know why. I just makes me uncomfortable that like she seems to travel with Moses like constantly and exclusively. It's super weird. It's just a weird thing. I don't know if he's watching her or she's watching him. Fucking at one point Banks calls her like hectic but reasonable. Just a dumb thing to say. Keemstar also made this very interesting comment about being friends with Gabby Hanna. And it's very interesting because it seems like Keemstar has this a tendency to become friends with people that have nowhere else to go. So Gabby Hanna is like a social pariah. Of course they're going to become friendly because it's a mutually exclusive relationship. Because they can build off of each other clout-wise. But also nobody else wants to associate themselves with them. So Keemstar's doing it with Trisha now. Trisha has really nowhere else to go because nobody respects her. So now it's on to Keemstar. And they get to like also add in the like, I hate Ethan, so we have to like Trisha kind of a narrative. You understand what I'm saying? There was a point where they equated Trisha to Gabby. I agree 100%. The one thing that was like really fucked up, actually, not the one thing, but one thing that was really fucked up is that Trisha said that there was this thing called Ethan syndrome where you never think you're wrong. Now, I know Ethan is a fucking pretentious dick, but he has admitted being wrong multiple times with Trisha. For instance, this thing where he criticized Trisha's weight or whatever, like 3 years ago, that was totally like he apologized for that. There was a comment that he made about the candlestick going into Trisha's cooter, right? Where he asked her mother about it on a Disney trip. And like he did it because he thought it was okay because she mentioned on the podcast, but the mother got really uncomfortable. So Ethan was like, I'm really sorry. And he apologized for that. Now, does Ethan apologize for everything he does wrong? No. But Ethan has apologized to Trisha more than he's apologized to anybody else. So it's weird that Trisha keeps labeling these things some kind of an Ethan syndrome. Let's see, lying about bringing up things from the past. Yeah, Trisha liked to talk about how she never like brought up things from the past, and that was like an Ethan thing. But like she was literally doing it the entire podcast. They touched on David Dobrik a bit, and I thought it was like an interesting situation. So the David Dobrik thing is something I got swept up into and like agreeing with Ethan and Trisha about, even though I don't know what's wrong with me, but I'm of course learning. Here's the reality of the David Dobrik situation. I believe the kid's name was Jason. I might be wrong about that. Maybe it's not Jason. It might be something else. That he did the kissing prank on that one young man. where he had him kiss the fucking old guy. I don't really, was it Jeff Wittick? I don't know. These guys are all losers. Anyway, there was like these big allegations and they were equating it to sexual assault. It's not sexual assault, okay? He kissed somebody he thought was a girl. It was Jason. He kissed somebody he thought was a girl and it wasn't. It's a violation for sure. It's not sexual assault. You're not, it's not the equivalent of being like forcefully taken advantage of. And it always bothered me that they equated it to sexual assault. But again, I was swept up into it. I was being a little too like, oh, guys, it gets weird. But Trisha doubled down on that when they brought it up about how David Dobrik's still like a really shitty person. He's never admitted his faults. Meanwhile, like Keemstar and Banks were like, yeah, no, he actually apologized to like everybody. It was like a weird thing, and Trisha was like, no, I disagree, like that didn't happen. And they're just like, yeah, you just apologized to everybody. I think that David Dobrik grew up in an era of social media where it was a bunch of children getting watched by other children and adults weren't supervising the situation. That's kind of what was happening. You really do have that issue. It was almost like a social experiment. You know, YouTube wasn't telling David Dobrik not to do kissing pranks or to not rent like machinery that he has no license for. Remember, he like almost killed a guy swinging it around. You know, like it was just happening. And what I think is the most interesting thing, I don't remember what the old guy's name was. Is it Jeff? There's an old dude that hangs out with David Dobrik, which is super creepy. And what bothers me about that is that like that's Jason. Okay, that's Jason. Okay, that guy is an adult, and so whether this is active or not, it's Jason Nash. Yeah, whether it's active or intentional or not, the dynamic here is that like David Dobrik's in charge, but Jason Nash is the moral authority of David Dobrik. So if David Dobrik's like, hey, 40-year-old man, we want to do this, and the guy's like, yeah, sure, that signals to this young person that like it's okay, because an old moron acting irresponsibly is like, yeah, it's totally fine if we do really irresponsible, dumb fucking pranks, right? That doesn't mean David Dobrik is like completely innocent, but I think that it's something he can apologize from and he can move on. And I think that it was shitty that we like really dogpiled it and I didn't look at it in the most honest way that I should have. There was one claim at some point where Trisha claims that she had sex with a teacher when she was 6, which is obviously assault. And I hate this situation. I hate that Trisha puts us in this scenario because I just watched like a history of Trisha, and what happened is she used to say that when she was in school, she would dress more sexualized to get attention from the male teachers, and they would like hug her and stuff. It was nothing predatory. Then that changed so that she was never trying to be sexualized, and she tried to actually make herself look uglier, but one teacher sexually assaulted her. Now she's claiming she was sexually assaulted when she was 6. I normally will never invalidate what somebody says, but like in this instant, I simply don't believe her because she lies so much. I don't think that it's what happened. And if you kind of look into Trisha Paytas, she's uncomfortable talking about one specific scenario in her life, and that's when her I think her fiance or her mom's ex-husband used to get naked and hang out in her room with her, and that made her really uncomfortable. And she doesn't go into depth with that, right? That doesn't really, she's uncomfortable talking about that, which sounds like a real trauma. But every other trauma she has in her life, she blasts constantly. And so, like, with everything together, Trisha being somebody who you really can't take seriously, etc., and the fact that she's won't talk about that event, which seems like real trauma, but blasts out every other event, I think that she's not telling the truth. I honestly, I don't believe her. Not because I don't believe assault survivors, but because we think Trisha weaponizes very serious situations to say whatever she feels like she wants to say and to not have any social backlash. Trisha's like the kind of person that hurts people. Like, she hurts like real survivors by lying about things constantly, regardless of whether it's a survivor of assault or it's somebody who has like a particular mental illness. And because she creates like so much doubt surrounding her, people invalidate other people on that. And I want to say, don't do that. Only invalidate Trisha. There was also a conversation about, I guess David Dobrik has been like with some girl or something. I don't know if they're with them like physically, but they've been filming. And he's been filming her when she's like really drunk. And Trisha brought up like, oh, I think that's irresponsible, which I agree with. But apparently it's like consensual. And Trisha brought up this fact. She was like, well, but what if in the future she changes her mind? Basically, like, it can invalidate, like, oh, well, if people change their minds and then they see it as trauma in the future. Oh, you know what they were talking about? That young kid that got kissed. Originally, apparently, that young kid that got kissed by Jason Nash, the old gross guy. Apparently, he at first, like, asked his mom and he was, like, fine with it after that, even though he was uncomfortable. And then later on down the line, he, like, regretted it, which is something that I didn't know. And that's one of the conversations where it's like, there's a difference between regret and assault. You can do something and regret it. It doesn't mean that that thing loses the consensualness of the situation and is gone. That's the truth. And like, yes, there's a power dynamic there. David Dobrik was like his boss in some capacity. I do understand that. However, if this young man just simply didn't do the prank, he could have left, but he wanted to be in that industry. And it's a lot of unfortunate things. I think that David Dobrik was still being inappropriate and like mishandling his platform. But to sit here and say that he was actively trying to like set the situation of sexual assault up, I think is kind of shitty. Yeah. So yeah, Trisha blames the ending of Frenemies on Ethan, trying to gaslight people into thinking that he was the reason that it had happened. The one thing that I think was really was really big. I keep saying the one thing I think was fucked up. One thing that I noted, this she basically completely walked back on her entire conversation or entire video she made about how Keemstar was basically assaulting that girl. It was kind of silly. Not silly. It was ridiculous, right? So what she said was, she's like, yeah, I wasn't really upset about it. I was just like a little nervous about the power dynamic or something. And then she like, Keemstar was like, oh no, I really like her and it's fine. And then she, you know, what she did was she said, I wish I could have just watched the fucking podcast. What she did was she was like, I was really just upset that you like showed her off because older men I used to date didn't want to show me off. It was weird. Even though in the video she said that it was basically the equivalent of sexual assault and there's a dangerous power dynamic there and you can't interact with your fans. And Trisha walked off it immediately, which shows to me she never believed what she said in the first place. That's what it is about Keemstar. She was just forcing drama. And like, she even called Ethan to talk about it and then gave him shit for talking about it. Keemstar and FaZe Banks talked a lot about, or towards the end, they talked about how like Ethan has no balls and he panders to his audience. I tend to agree that Ethan like goes along with the morality of children on Twitter and YouTube and etc. and TikTok, and like he just panders to his audience. I do agree with that fundamentally. Apparently, like they had Ethan and Hila had Keemstar onto a podcast at one point, and they were like really nice to him, and they were like having conversation. And then he got backlash from his fans about talking to Keemstar. So Ethan was like, "Yeah, we hate him too," and Keemstar feels shitty about that, which I can understand. And then they pretty much end with there was a situation against FaZe Banks. Something happened. I don't know too much about FaZe Banks, but apparently like Ethan lied about like him assaulting a girl, and it turned out it wasn't true. And instead of Ethan taking the video down and apologizing, he's like, I think people will just believe your video over mine. And he kept it up for money. That's really shitty too. It ended with Trisha saying that she's more pro Ethan, but of course keep in mind that she also said that the enemy of my enemy is my friend in reference to Keemstar, saying that like she's actually friendly with Keemstar, and that Trisha lied about everything. Honestly, from this point on, I think that it would be better for Ethan to just never acknowledge Trisha again. Stop acknowledging her. And then people say, well, but they're family. There's a way to not acknowledge family, right? The way that you don't acknowledge family at family parties is you talk to them like they're a person while you're there. You don't give them like any information that's like relevant to how your life's doing. You're just nice to them and then you move on. That's what he needs to do. Trisha is a fucking horrible vortex of dog shit and you need to stay away from her. Ironically, the beef with Banks was brought up by Trisha on Frenemies. Of course it was. So, yeah, that's pretty much everything. I wish I could have watched the podcast, but I don't want to have what happened to, Ethan. That's getting taken down. I don't know. What do you think about Moses just sitting through all the drama silently and not stopping Trisha from doing all this shit? I felt like Moses should also eat some blame for this. You're 100% correct. People are responsible for their significant others in some capacity, and Moses just stays quiet and we don't actually pull it forward. I will say, though, that she did like kind of beat up Moses at one point, so there's the potential that she's kind of abusive and that he's afraid to speak up. Honestly, there's your power dynamic there. The podcast isn't on fucking YouTube, bro. Okay, it's not on YouTube. Stop telling me it's on YouTube. I looked on YouTube. Send me the YouTube link.